So this video is about the scientific method, how science gets done in experiments. I don't think it's wise just to take the whole thing in one foul swoop, dive into technical details. So I'm going to break it up into little pieces, and my intent for my class is that you watch it just one piece at a time. But I've kind of put it all together in one spot in case you want to review it, or you just want to take it all in at once. Well, let's start with just a real basic overview of the scientific method. Now, there is no one scientific method, really. That needs to be said. It probably should be called scientific methods, plural. There's not one way to do science. Also remember, a lot of science is descriptive, just saying how tall something is, describing what does an elephant look like. It's not experimental at all. So what I'm talking about here is just how do you do an experiment to show you how something works. You ever get those little science kits when you were a kid, or maybe you've gotten some for your own kids? Maybe you entered something in a science fair. Usually those are more demonstrations. I mean, they are science related, like growing crystals, but they're not really experiments. And so if that's kind of your world of experience with the scientific method, you probably need to pitch that out, because it probably really wasn't a scientific experiment in the way that we'll talk about it. Now, the scientific method is not just one thing. Here are two different depictions of it. Sort of the classic one over here on the left side is one that we're familiar with. Now, this model doesn't really tell us exactly how much time is spent observing. Sometimes that could be the part that takes years, and the rest of it can take just a day. There's other parts in there. Do we have to ask a question? Do we have to make a prediction in order to make it science? Not necessarily. The other thing it doesn't really picture or capture is the idea that it's really kind of this back and forth process, that we spend some time testing ideas, like over here on the right, but there's a lot of exploration and discovery done before that, some discussion with other people, and evaluations of the benefits and outcomes. And there's a lot of back and forth between these different elements. At the heart of any scientific experiment is really getting at what is a cause and effect relationship. I've written some of them on the board here, at least some potential ones. Right? These are things that we presume are governed by some sort of natural law. And that's the goal of science, is to predict the world we live in and make sense of it. What causes what, we might ask. Right? And that's what our experiment is designed to tell us. How much of an effect does it have? How does that work? And that may not be done in just one single experiment. Now, the way that we at least initially think that two factors might be related, you could say is our hypothesis, right? That study time and grades are related. Study time is the cause. Causes have to come first, right? You first study and then your grades come later. You don't get good grades and therefore go back to study. Obviously not how it works. So causes have to come first, effects later, and our hypothesis is an attempt to explain that relationship. Why are these things related? How does that work? And so we might talk about the time you spend and the repetition may strengthen neural connections that make information more retrievable and permanent in your mind, leading to better performance on tests and therefore better grades. But that was a pretty long hypothesis, pretty long explanation, so that may take a bit to discover. But just because two things are related doesn't mean there's always a cause and effect relationship there. And so science is also about disproving things. And we need to think of good ideas to test. Remember, science needs to be based on testable hypotheses. And so let's see, are any of these up here things that you could just rule out? Things that are not based on natural laws and sort of the physics of the world that we know of? Well, I think this one here should probably be a good candidate. Good luck causes you to win the lottery. May be true, but we can't test it in science. There's no natural law about luck, at least that I know of. All right. What about some other ones? This one seems a little suspect to me, right? Good deeds causes you to have health or has an effect on your health is what this is saying. I guess if you don't do good deeds, the implication is that your health would suffer. And that may very well be true. Maybe your guilt causes high blood pressure. It may be an area where social science could get at it, but I think we'd have a little difficult time in biology saying what is exactly a good deed. Who decides if it's good? Some interesting potential psychology experiments there, but we'd have a difficult time with that one. This one is also pretty basic. Vitamins affect health, sure. I think I have a lot of questions about this one that probably need a little more explanation. Which vitamins? All vitamins? A combination of vitamins? What do you mean about health? There's a lot of different things we could mean by health. What are we measuring about it? And so that cause and effect relationship might start out basic and then sort of expand from there. This one may seem a little bit odd to you. Easter causes flowers to bloom. I mean, we kind of think of Easter as a time when flowers do bloom, but does this sort of celebration by some people cause the flowers to bloom? Well, that's actually a pretty easy one to test. Move Easter, right? Just put it on a calendar on a different day of the year. Celebrate it at a different time and see if there's really a relationship between these two. So I guess we could test that one, although kind of a funny one. So another one that I want to point out is this one that's been debunked pretty soundly. For a while, there was kind of this idea out there, and still has a lot of traction, that vaccination caused autism in kids. And so this one really is more of a coincidence in a way than it is a cause and effect relationship. And the idea there is really that about the time kids get vaccinated, we don't vaccinate them, right the moment they're born. We wait a little bit, and about that same time, they start developing socially, and that's when autism would actually show up. You wouldn't see it in an infant. They just don't have the social skills to show it. So although it seems like there's a relationship there, it's really more of a coincidental one, sort of a correlation, but not causation. And so some things, when we're looking for that cause and effect, we don't want to mix the two up. Overall, science experiments are trying to get at cause and effect relationships that we can put to the test. The more specifics you have on there, the better. We can certainly design experiments that are more likely to really put this to a good test. And that's what science is about, is let's see if we can get our hypothesis, our explanation of cause and effect to fail. I mean, a good scientific experiment really is trying to make that fail. So more about that in a little bit. Now, good science makes a fair comparison. What we really want to do is figure out each little piece of how something works. It's not our natural tendency, right? If you kind of are making some soup and you take a scoop out and you taste it, it could be better. You just start throwing stuff in, right? Add some salt, add some herbs, add some spices, add a little more water, add some juice. And then you stir it up again, and then you taste it, and hey, it's better. It worked. What worked? Which part of that worked? Maybe it was just that you stirred it. Maybe it was that you stirred it clockwise. Maybe it wouldn't have worked if you stirred it counterclockwise. You'll never know. That's my point. Is we kind of take that approach to a lot of things. We want our hair to look good, and so it's looking a little bad, and so you say, all right, well, I'm going to change my shampoo. And I heard that peanut butter works too. If you rub some of that in your hair, then that works. I even heard that if you rub some salt into your scalp, then that works. And I heard honey is a great sort of thing, and even corn syrup. And so you just kind of dump all these on your hair. Well, so your hair comes out looking fantastic later on. Which of these was responsible? Not really much of an experiment. All right, so let's talk about the comparison part, right? So you decide, I really want to test peanut butter because I really think that's fascinating. I want to see how that affects my hair growth. Well, you need something to compare it to. You can't just rub peanut butter all over your head and see what happens. I guess you could, but that's not an experiment. We need to compare it to something. So what might make a good experiment is either I could put peanut butter on my hair, and then my brother could put no peanut butter on his hair, and we'll compare the two. Well, that's kind of a nice idea, except we're two different people with two different lifestyles. We use two different shampoos. Who knows what works? So one nice approach is, what if I just take some peanut butter and put it on the right side of my hair, and I just leave the left side, everything else this is the same. So now I have two sides of my head that I can compare, see what made a difference. Does the peanut butter side look any different than the other side? At least I have something to compare it to. So in addition to having the two sides of my head that I can compare, I also need that comparison to be a really fair one, right? You wouldn't challenge somebody to a race and tie weights around all of their ankles. Everybody else in the stands would say, that's not fair. So I need to make sure the experiment is fair, that I'm treating both sides of my head equal in every single way other than just the peanut butter. That's the treatment. It's the only difference between the two sides. You know, if I scratch this side of my head, I need to scratch this side of my head. If I put one type of shampoo on this side, I need to use the same type of shampoo on that side. I can't favor one side or the other and kind of stack the race in a way, stack the experiment. Scientific experiments then need to be fair, and they need to compare with your hair. Now sometimes we run into situations where we're not just rubbing something in our hair, we're taking a pill, and that creates this sort of psychosomatic effect called the placebo effect, right? Somebody takes a pill, they think they're getting better, they might start to just have a better attitude about it, and there's a real effect by just taking a pill, even if there's nothing in the pill, or it's just a sugar pill. And so to make two groups fair in terms of their comparison, if we're, let's say, taking blood pressure medication, we're just testing that out. Well, one group of people need to take the actual medication, see if it has an effect on their blood pressure. And the other group, we can't just give them nothing. We need to give them a pill too, so that the groups are the same in every way. Everybody is taking a pill. It's just that one group actually has some medicine in it and the other group doesn't, but they don't know that, right? You got to keep that a secret. That is making sure that you have a really, really fair comparison. You know, when it comes to human trials, if we're testing things on people, or any other animal for that matter, there's a variety of things that you think we need to keep those the same. If we're studying two groups of people and not just the same person kind of before and after, then we need to keep age, gender, sometimes race factors into things, sometimes it doesn't. Your body size, whether that's weight or height, all of those can have a big effect on the outcomes. You know, think about it, again, you do that blood pressure medication and you're testing it out. You did the placebo and everything else, but one group is all men and one group is all women. What does that tell you? Probably just that men and women are different. So that wasn't a fair comparison. What I would probably recommend instead is that you do that trial just with men. And then you do it again just with women. Right? And if you're doing it with people of different body sizes or different ages, then you kind of separate that out into different trials as well, so that you're not kind of mixing it all together. One group is older than the other. Well, then who knows what really happened? Was it the age? Was it the pill that changed their blood pressure? Who knows? Keep everything as fair and even as you can. Well, let's put this to the test. You know, most people have a pretty good fair meter. So let me see if you can spot the flaws in this experiment that I did. So I have 3 different plants, and I tested one with this mystery fertilizer, one with good old Miracle Grow, and one with the pellet fertilizer. My conclusion, this one. Look at this thing. This thing is going crazy. This fertilizer must be the best because this plant is the most lush. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense, does it? No, of course not. These are 3 different plants. It's fine that we have different fertilizers, but we have 2 things changing at once. This is not fair. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, your fair meter just says, that's no good. All right, well, let's try this again. Now I have 3 ficus plants. This one here, I'm not treating with anything. I'm just watering it. Watering this one too with Miracle Grow. I'm watering this one and adding some of this granular fertilizer. Does that seem better? I mean, look, let me get the fertilizer out of the way. You can even see the pots are the same size. Plants are about the same size. Soil is about the same. You can't see it, but I'll tell you that it is. Does that seem fair? At least way better than the other one. So data collection. It's at the heart of science, near and dear to my heart, right? You should have something that you're writing it down on, whether that's a clipboard and data sheet or some sort of lab notebook. You should be writing in pen so it's permanent, and you shouldn't be leaving it all to your memory. So data collection, if science is empirical, let me see it. Where is the data? Where are the data? And even that goes for things like when you do an experiment, labeling all of your trials. That plant experiment that I was showing before. How am I supposed to tell the difference between those plants? Am I supposed to give them a name and just hope I recognize them? No, you should have, plant A, plant B, plant C, or some other sort of label so you can keep track of things and record it faithfully in your records. Of course, when we're keeping records, we want them to be as accurate and precise as possible. And some of that's just eliminating bias. We don't just stick our finger in water and say, yeah, it's pretty warm. We use a thermometer. It's an objective way of measuring things. And so objectivity is also important whenever you can accomplish that. If you're looking at someone, a patient, and assessing their pallor, now, the skin tone, that's an important measurement, but not one that you can just kind of have a little pallor meter and say, what color are they? It's something that's subjective. So not all data have to be exactly objective. But if we can get there, then we should. That's why we have standard units of measure like centimeters and grams and things like that, so that we're all speaking the same language when it comes to our observations. Two basic types of data we might take. One is quantitative, and that's the one you usually think of with data. That's numbers, right? What quantities do they have? There's a number associated with that, whether it's a distance measurement, blood pressure, anything with a number, that is quantitative. Qualitative data are still important, like the example I gave with pallor, or if you were to assess the color of something. Those are data measurements as well. And qualitative measurements, the description of their qualities, is also a legitimate form of data, even if there's no number with it. I've been watching this rock for a long time, and it's not changed. Well, this brings us to the discussion of variables. Experiments are not very interesting if nothing changes. And so we need variables. We need things that vary, things that change. That's the heart of science. This is kind of where things get technical, and a lot of people get lost in the terminology. Not a big deal, but with practice, I'm sure you can get it. Let's go back to that idea of cause and effect relationships. I've listed a few others out here. Remember, our cause always comes before the effect, and I want to talk about this now in terms of variables. So I think we talked about last time, study time, grades, both of these vary, right? You can study more or less, and that can cause your grades to go up or down. In a different example then, we could look at light color and plant growth. There's not a matter of up and down. This would be one of those qualitative variables. We might test red light, green light, blue light, violet light, any color of light, and see if plant growth varies. Plant growth can vary by growing more or less. We might even look at how green the leaves are as a result. So those are a couple that we can take a look at. What about this one? This is kind of a funny one, and I just threw this in here to look again at that cause and effect relationship. Your appearance affects your salary. This kind of comes from the observation that, it seems like good-looking people get the good, high-paying jobs. But couldn't it be the other way? Maybe people that have good paying jobs can afford, mani-pedis and great hair care and stylish clothes, and so that affects their appearance. In this case, this relationship is a little harder to get at. I don't know which is the cause and which is the effect. I mean, does the salary depend on your appearance, or does your appearance depend on your salary? I'm going to use that as a springboard to talk about two different variables. So we can't really determine that one. These two are pretty clear, that I don't think that the amount that a plant grows could affect the color of light that gets shown on it, right? This one clearly depends on this. Same with your grades, depending on how much time you put into studying. And so these are variables, right? They change, they vary. That's the thing about variables, is they vary. And these depend on these other ones. And so you always hear about dependent and independent variables. So just put it to the test. Say grades depend on study time. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I would say that this is the dependent variable. So that one is dependent. If that one's dependent, then this one doesn't really care, right? The amount of study time doesn't really depend on the grades you get. This one is completely independent of that. So this one, sort of the cause, we would call the independent variable. Just some terminology in science that is good to get used to. The other thing that we might think about when it comes to this is a lot of times when you have two variables, you end up graphing them to see the relationship. And in that case, usually the independent variable is on the x-axis, where your dependent variable is on the y-axis. If you start getting data points where there seems to be this correlation, then you say, boy, it sure looks like they're varying together, that they're changing in the same way, and I see that that indicates a relationship between them. Whereas, what if the data points did this? Then you could say, well, yeah, there's still a relationship. As this one increases, this one decreases. That's still a relationship, not the one we'd be looking for in the case of study time. That would be kind of strange, right? If study time increased and your grades went down, that indicates something's going terribly wrong. But it does indicate some sort of interesting relationship. Maybe you're studying too long, getting too tired, and your grades are dropping because you fall asleep during the test. All right, so in either way, that indicates a relationship. Now, if we were to graph this independent and dependent variable in the end and find that the data points were just all over the place, and I can't really find any trend in there, that would indicate that there's no relationship at all. The two variables I'm looking at are not related. Now, part of the process of science is simplifying the world enough so that we can really study it well and draw a firm conclusion. But the world is complex, right? I mean, even predictable things that should be predictable, like the weather, are impossible to predict, right? Weathermen can get things maybe a week out at most, and then forecasts just kind of fall apart. Why? Because the world is complex, right? It's not just about temperature, but about wind and ocean currents and everything else. Even something as simple as light, color, and plant growth. Well, we know that things more than just the color of light showing on a plant affect their growth. What else affects growth? You got things like fertilizer that we've talked about before. Couldn't that be an independent variable, something that is a cause that could affect the plant's growth? Absolutely. How about the soil? Can you think of more? Okay, so maybe the length of time they're in the light, how many hours of sunlight they get each day. Maybe the type of plant, maybe some plants like blue light and some plants like red light. Who knows? There's lots of different factors that could affect plant growth. And if we don't control those things and keep them contained, then they're really going to mess up my experiment. So let's say, kind of going back to that other experiment example, let's say that I tested a plant, I used red light, I added fertilizer, that I had it in regular potting soil, that I had 12 hours of sunlight, and type of plant, there's a spider plant in there. Okay, so that was one trial, and I compared that to another one. So we've got to compare, right? So what am I going to compare that to? I'm going to put one in blue light. I'm not going to have any fertilizer, but all of these are going to be the same. Well, that's a real problem, because now I don't know if the plant grew more or less because of the color of light or because of the fertilizer. So I need to keep everything except what I'm studying the same, at least as much as I can. So I'm going to go ahead and add fertilizer to that one. Or maybe better yet, neither of them get fertilizer. So nothing's changing. All right. So all of these are variables, right? They are things that could vary, but I'm not going to let them vary. So if I don't let them vary, they become constant, don't they? They can have no effect on my dependent variable. And that's what I want, right? I want a good controlled experiment where I know what is the effect of light color, because that's my core question. What effect does the color of light have on plant growth? And so all of these guys down here become constants, so to speak. Or we might call them controlled variables. Another term you'll see is standardized variables. All these are getting at the same thing. That we're trying to create as fair of an experiment as we can. So it's back to that same idea, just kind of using some more formal language between our independent variables and dependent variables, and now we have controlled variables. Those are the things that make up a good experiment, that I have a clearly defined research question that's testable, and then I controlled all these other things. In human trials, these are, again, pretty standard. We want to control things like age, gender, body size, things like that. We want to keep them as much the same as possible. Amount of exercise, diet. Those would be two other major ones, right? We don't want to test some sort of blood pressure medication and half the people are getting a really salty diet and the other half are getting a salt-free diet. Well, that's clearly going to affect their blood pressure. So I want their diet to be the same. One way you can do that is to basically lock everybody up in a big gym or something like that, a big house, kind of a big brother experiment where everybody's in the same place, eating the same meals, sleeping in the same types of beds, all that sort of stuff. Everything is the same except for the one thing that you're changing. Let's talk about repetition in science and why it's important. So science is about understanding how the world works, right? About those natural laws that kind of govern how the world operates. Us, plants, bacteria, all of those things. So a lot of experiments start out small trials, right? So we might do a drug study on a few people. But if that drug study only applies to Australian women between the ages of 34 and 36, taking place in 1995, well, that just doesn't apply real broadly, does it? You know, who else does it work on? I don't know. I've not studied it. So we start small, but then we have to expand. We have to have repetition. We want lots and lots and lots of people or lots of plants in a trial. When we study them, our experiment should have big numbers to see if it's really a thing, to see if it's predictable, that it works the same every single time. You know, there's going to be a few of those flubs. Somebody that the drug doesn't work for, some plant that grows great even without fertilizer, who knows exactly why, but those are just matters of chance. So they happen. But you want to know, what's the big trend? You know, if I grew 1,000 plants over here and 1,000 over here, what's overall the difference between those two groups, plants or people? So repetition is important. We might also want to try it again the next year, the next season. Let's try it in a different country. Let's repeat the whole experiment somewhere else. Better yet, could somebody else do the same experiment? I just write down all my methods, I send it to them, they try it, they get the same results. Wouldn't that increase your confidence? And that's what we're about, right? Science is about the evidence. Show me the evidence. The more evidence you have under the more circumstances, the more you're sure that it's a real thing.